What a great presentation from Ray Dalio, and we're one of over 80 organizations in the country who are hosting this. Want to thank of course, World Affairs Council is co-hosting it with the University of Texas San Antonio, and we appreciate everyone for tuning in. And we have a lot to cover in the next hour with the local perspective, and we have some moderators, and everyone will be introduced, but we're very glad that you could join us this evening. And we also want to thank our Facebook friends who are tuning in. Those students who are tuning in, there's an important message for you at the end of this, so you don't want to miss that message when we are concluding the program. And if you have any questions, please direct those questions in the Q&A icon, tap it in there, and we'll keep an eye on that. And the chat room is mainly for communication from us, and also any commentary you may have. I'm very excited about this program today. Like I said, we're co-hosting with our friends at UTSA. We have an extraordinary panel that will be shortly introduced. My friend David Firestein with the U.S. China Foundation, and Commissioner Tommy Calvert, and local professors who focus on U.S.-Chinese relations from UTSA and also University of Incarnate Word. Without further ado, I do want to bring in Dr. Lisa Montoya, who will introduce one of her colleagues at UTSA to kick us off. And Dr. Montoya is, she's been with UTSA since 2005. She's the Vice Provost for Global Initiatives. Her full bio is in the link, but I will point out that she has held several roles at UTSA, including the Vice Provost for Global Initiatives, which is now, and she has served in the College of Business, and she's a product of Washington University, where she received her PhD, and also a product of Arizona State University, as well as the University of Denver. So I'm looking forward to this program, and I will come toward the end and thank everybody for tuning in, and with some special messages. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lisa Montoya.
Thank you so much, Armin, for that gracious introduction. It's really my privilege to give a rowdy UTSA welcome to this Chinatown Hall. As mentioned, I'm Lisa Montoya, and I'm Vice Provost for Global Initiatives at UTSA. Along with my team, we work on many international activities and initiatives across the university in the areas of research, student mobility, as well as service. And as with many activities that we do, the Chinatown Hall gives us a chance to come together and really, truly enjoy, relish in conversation about global relations. At least that's the way I feel about it. I truly hope that everyone here will take away some useful insights from tonight's proceeding, especially with our San Antonio panelists. I'm also pleased that we're collaborating with our partners at the World Affairs Council. Thank you, Armin. For the San Antonio portion of our program, we've assembled an engaged panel of leaders to take your questions, and the introductions will come later. But led, and I want to express my thanks, by our distinguished moderator, Dr. Xiaohe Shi, who's professor and chair of sociology at UTSA. To all of you, we appreciate your contributions this evening. I also want to thank Armin Babajanian and the World Affairs Council, and of course the UTSA Education Abroad team, all of whom put this program together. To continue with this program this evening, I'm pleased to introduce you to Dr. Wenxiang Yao, who is professor and chair of kinesiology at UTSA, former director of our East Asia Institute, and leader on U.S. China relations for many years. Dr. Yao, I pass the baton to you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Montoya. Thanks for your kind words in inviting me back. I feel so good. I'd also like to thank you for your strong leadership. No doubt about that. Well, instead of saying something, in my own words, here I'd like to quote what the President-elect Mr. Joe Biden said on Sunday in his victory speech, which I hope will be the future direction for handling the relationship between the two countries, the United States and China. Here I quote, "It's time to put away harsh rhetoric, lower the temperature, see each other again, listen to each other again," end quote. Well, now please join me in welcoming our tonight's moderator, an outstanding scholar and creative administrator, professor, and the former chair of the Department of Sociology at UTSA. Above all, very good friend of mine, Professor Xiaohe Xu. Dr. Xu.
Thank you very much, Professor Yao. Good evening. I'm honored to be here to moderate the 14th Annual China Town Hall, which is jointly hosted by UTSA and the World Affairs Council of San Antonio. Before we open up for Q&A, let me briefly introduce our honored panelists without particular order. We are very pleased to have Dr. Lopta Nath. She's a professor and the department chair of History, Asian Studies program at the University of Incarnate Word. We are also pleased to have my colleague from UTSA, Dr. Wenxiang Yao. He's a professor and the interim department chair of kinesiology. We are fortunate to have Mr. Tommy Calvert. He is Bexar County Commissioner. I believe he's currently serving his second term. Congratulations, by the way. We are also honored to have Mr. David Firestein. He is the CEO of the U.S China Foundation based in Austin, Texas. So welcome. One more time, please join me to welcome our honored panelists. Let's do it virtually. To facilitate this town hall discussion, I'm going to give you some possible topics that may include, but not limited to, history of U.S. China relations, response to the pandemic, trade deal, energy, business innovation, scholarly exchange programs, and public health. These questions can be considered particularly in the context of a transition of power from President Trump to President-elect Biden. So please ask your questions 3 different ways. You can ask your question directly. I will try my best to identify you. Or you can raise your hand. And finally, you can type your questions into the Q&A box. So if possible, please indicate to which panelist you would like to address your question to, or you can directly address your questions to all the panelists. Please state your name and tell us a little bit about what you do before you ask questions. We're going to promptly end our Q&A at 7:50. So let's get started. If it's okay with each one of you, there are 5 questions already typed into Q&A, so you can go to that box. I'm going to read the first one. So let's go order with the first one. I believe those questions are directed to the entire panel. The first question is worded, what role do US firms and US government play in the growing problem of China's predatory methods of stealing IP? Any panelists would like to address or answer the question? Please feel free.
Dr. Xu, hi, this is David Firestein. Maybe I'll start. If I understand correctly, is the question, what role does the US government and US firms play in the theft of intellectual property? Well, let me say a couple of things. One, the issue of intellectual property theft is certainly a big issue in the US-China trade relationship. Generally, I think there's a consensus in the United States that there is a very substantial degree of illegal exfiltration of commercially valuable intellectual property on the part of China. I think there's a debate as to the range, but there's not much of a debate as to the broad scale of that activity. It's been one of the long simmering issues in U.S. China trade relations dating back to the early to mid 1990s. The first sustained U.S. China negotiations around intellectual property rights protection took place in the mid 90s when I was a U.S. diplomat at the embassy in Beijing. And I was a part of those talks, played a small role. And yet the issue persists. I think there are some pretty fundamental differences between the United States and China in terms of how we understand the concept of intellectual property. And there remains a pretty significant gulf, I think, in our understandings of the issue, and a gulf between what the Chinese do and what the United States would like to see the Chinese do and not do. To the question, the U.S. government's role in all of this is has consistently been under previous administrations and under this administration to try to reduce the level of that illicit activity, to try to get greater levels of protection for U.S. intellectual property. And for the companies, for their part, American companies certainly take their concerns to the United States government, to the USTR, to other agencies in the executive branch, to Congress, and make their concerns known. And I think there's a very robust dialogue between the US private sector and the US government that's all designed to try to curb some of the very problematic behavior in terms of theft of intellectual property. The truth is that notwithstanding significant efforts under presidential administrations of both parties, that there still is a lot of this that occurs, and it's still an ongoing issue in the relationship. But I think the general consensus is that over time, as China becomes a greater stakeholder in intellectual property rights protection, as a major technology player, as an innovator, as an innovation, I would say, aspiring superpower, that China is going to look at the issue of intellectual property very differently as it has more skin in the game. So it's an ongoing issue. It's a continued source of tension in the trade relationship. It's been a tough nut to crack, and I'm sure that the Biden administration will continue efforts to try to generate progress on this issue.
I'm going to briefly ask you something for your personal observation. I know the Chinese government has promised to make improvement over time. From your point of view, have you seen enough evidence if they have made any progress or improvement in this area?
Yes, I think the intellectually honest answer is that there has been some progress. Certain things that were happening in China in the 1990s don't happen today. Just for example, in the early to mid 1990s, it was not uncommon to see Chinese government agencies using pirated software from Microsoft, for example, or from other US companies. That doesn't happen nearly as much, if at all, anymore. The government, for its part, has managed to root out a lot of that activity within the government sector. That said, a lot of piracy continues in other sectors of the Chinese economy. So, to your question, Dr. Chu, has there been progress? Yes, I think there has. Have the laws gotten better? Yes. Are they enforced to a somewhat greater degree? I believe so. And that all being said, there's still, and I might add, U.S. companies often now win cases in Chinese courts, something that happened a lot less frequently 15 or 20 years ago. But the leading experts in this country, American experts on this topic, have noted over a number of years that actually there is a trend line that American companies that bring lawsuits are actually having success getting legal remedies to the problems that they face in China. But all of that being said, yes, there's still a lot of room for progress, and it's an ongoing process.
Thank you. Next question has something to do with the relationship with Vietnam. So what is the current economic and the diplomatic relationship between China and Vietnam? This is from Mario.
I'll take that question.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question considering we are looking at US-China relations. But I feel this issue between Vietnam and China has grown progressively worse in the recent years because of the South China Sea issue. And we do realize that there was a normalization of relationships starting around 1980s, but then in the recent years, all these the diplomatic breakthroughs on these maritime territorial disputes, especially on the Spratly Islands, which runs very close to the Vietnamese coastline, has caused more and more problems because China has reclaimed a lot of lands there. China has become very has militarized these areas. There has been a sharpening of their activities in these areas. And so these disputes remain the main and focal point between China and Vietnam. And I think the biggest problem here are the other countries in this Asia Pacific region that are also affected by the South China Sea, aggressiveness. And I feel like other countries like Brunei, Philippines, and Malaysia, to a certain extent, have also, have kind of retracted from being too aggressive in their response to China. And especially if we look at Philippines, they are taking the opportunity of all the investments and the economic development to not point too many fingers. So Vietnam, in many ways, find themselves alone in this situation. And also, as we look at the other situation, is that Vietnam has to deal with this almost independently, in the face of constant China's, blame, saying that Vietnam is the troublemaker in this region. And so we also feel that that might also lead to what relationships Vietnam and the US might have in the region, because it also boils down to how much US will resist China's aggressiveness in the South China Sea. So overall, I feel there is going to be an attempt in these years, especially from Vietnam, to try and keep China at bay, trying to keep their own position. But at the same time, I know that it will also lead to how much US will interfere in the South China Sea to prevent the aggressiveness from, becoming overt. And so I think it is a very complicated relationship between China and Vietnam. And I know that it's not happy because it also reflects, or it will reverberate in the whole Asia Pacific region, on China's relationship with ASEAN in the Southeast Asian region. And I think all of that, will need a lot of work. Thank you.
All right, let's move on to the next question. It's raised by Professor Herman Stockholm. He is the former president of Stockholm University, presently senior fellow at the Indiana University, and he lives in San Antonio. I have held a number of research positions in China, mostly in Beijing and Shanghai, in the area of genetics and American studies. I'm retired and live in San Antonio. I wonder if you think the current and the future circumstances are likely to lead to further advancement of a collaboration or collaborative research. Would any panelists take this up?
I'd be happy to address that if
Yes,
others.
please.
So it's a great question. First of all, I think for decades now, there has really been a very substantial level of research collaboration between the United States and China. I think many of the folks on this call are in academia, as I was in a previous iteration in my career, and know firsthand how valuable that international collaboration, and specifically U.S. China collaboration, has been in any number of different areas on academic campuses and in commercial research and development efforts and so on. And so there's a very substantial bond there between our two countries in terms of scientific and technological collaboration. I think that has come under some challenge over the last, over the presidency of Donald Trump, in particular, the last 2.5 or 3 years. And I would say there's been an increasing level of caution, I think, felt by university administrators, by federal legislators, by executive branch agencies. There has clearly been a greater level of scrutiny on Chinese nationals who are conducting research on U.S. university campuses. I know Dr. Xu probably knows that issue far better than I do, and I'm sure others do as well. To be honest, just to state my view, I have been very deeply concerned, and we at the George H.W. Bush Foundation for U.S. China Relations, my organization, have broadly been very deeply concerned at what I would call, and I think I was one of the very first to use this term back in 2018, neo-McCarthyism in this country, and a tendency to have a massive level of, in my judgment, unjustified mistrust of ethnically Chinese individuals, including ethnically Chinese American citizens. And we've seen any number of cases in research settings in which ethnically Chinese individuals, often American citizens, have seen their careers incinerated on the basis of what ultimately proved to be completely unsubstantiated allegations or suspicions about their activities. I think that is enormously problematic. I think it's bad for America. I think McCarthyism is un-American and despicable. And I think we at the George H.W. Bush Foundation for U.S. China Relations, and I personally, have just felt that we've needed to speak out about this issue because I think a lot of unjustified actions are being taken. And the evidence of that assertion is the fact that so many of the people who are alleged to have done something wrong, it turns out didn't do anything wrong, according to the U.S. Legal authorities. So to your question, I think that all of this is going to have a chilling effect on U.S.-China scientific collaboration, unfortunately. I think we're seeing that borne out already in a number of different settings across the country. And I think it takes increasing levels of courage for U.S. university administrators and other decision makers to stand behind their people and stand behind the concept of collaboration. But I can tell you the need and the urgency associated with U.S.-China scientific collaboration has never been greater, particularly as the world faces a global public health challenge like we haven't seen in many, many, many years, COVID-19. And I think what we need now is more collaboration, not less. And yes, if people are doing things they shouldn't be doing, that should be addressed through the legal channels that are designed for that. But I think we need to get away as a nation from unfounded McCarthyist tendencies to simply distrust people based on the color of their skin or their ethnicity. I think that's repugnant. It's un-American. It was un-American when Senator McCarthy did it, and it's un-American today.
Thank you, David. It's very well said. We have some local examples. I'm going to go over them in Texas. Yeah. As we all know, in Houston. I'm going to stop there. As a social scientist, though, I have to say, we are less monitored as a natural scientist, as the issues we deal with probably would not involve a lot of national security and so on and so forth. All right. One of my colleagues at UTSA continues to pursue relationship between China and Vietnam. So Dr. Knott, you may want to help us a little bit. Given the historical animosities between Vietnam and China, what is relationship like now, and how does it impact U.S. relations with both countries?
I think I just talked about how Vietnam is dependent, will become dependent, I feel, in the near future on strengthening political relations with making sure that U.S. does stand as a protector of China's aggressiveness in the South China Seas. And going to the question, I don't know if anybody else wants to add to it. I'm okay with it. So the question is, what is the relationship like now, and how does it impact U.S. relations with both countries? Does anyone want to add to it?
Please, David.
I'll just say one brief additional comment to the very good points that Dr. Nath made. And that is just to accentuate a point that Dr. Nath noted, and that is that the South China Sea issue has become a kind of wedge issue in driving apart China and Vietnam. They are on opposite sides of a number of territorial and maritime claims, and there is some, I would say, some bad blood between the countries in the present moment around South China Sea issues. But just 2 or 3 years ago, there was a case in which Chinese commercial ships came into waters that Vietnam regarded as being within its jurisdiction, or at least its exclusive economic zone, or EEZ. That created a lot of tension. There was considerable tension around that particular action. And I think that the point that I would make simply is that as long as the South China Sea issue remains unresolved, as I believe it probably will remain for some years to come, relations between China and Vietnam, while not terrible, probably are dealing with a glass ceiling beyond which they can't develop further unless and until those particular issues are resolved to the mutual satisfaction of both of those countries as well as the other claimants. I don't see that happening anytime soon. So I think you're going to continue to see some friction, significant friction between the two countries around the South China Sea dispute.
I would just add some personal observation myself. I would strongly encourage my colleague, Mario Salas, look into political reforms in those two countries. I think Vietnam has launched aggressive political reform. They are moving so fast toward the West and the United States. While China, as we all know, made a little bit of progress, but not much. So this is why they don't see each other eye to eye, and they have a lot of internal conflicts in terms of party politics. Not to mention, in the past, we had some political and military conflicts. All right, let's move on to our next question, again by Professor Herman Sadkamp. I hope I did not murder your name. Do you think the current policies, do you think the current political difficulties will lessen our abilities to conduct collaborative research with a major Chinese researcher? This is similar to the question we had.
Yeah, I would just say, I think that's quite similar to the earlier question. The short answer is, I do think that the environment in which we're now operating, particularly on the US side, generates a chilling effect for some types of research collaboration between researchers and scientists in the two countries. I hope that we get beyond that and get back to a more constructive way of working together. But at the moment, I do think we're going to see that chilling effect continue for some time to come. I think a lot will depend on the overall tenor of the relationship as we move into the Biden administration. And I am hopeful that things will get back to a kind of status quo ante rather than remain where they are now.
Next question is extremely interesting. I hope our panelists, we find ways to answer it. What can we expect from China in dealing with the Uyghur concentration camps in Xinjiang that has received international attention?
Can I answer that a little bit?
Yes, please.
And I would also like Dr. Firestein to jump on it, because I know it's a really sore point, because we've seen China's policy, especially, coming from India. I have also been very close to the Tibetan issue. So I have studied and I have understood the way China has, dealt with Tibet. Let's be politically, correct here. And so I feel like the Uyghur issue, which was a similar situation like Tibet as an autonomous zone, has grown from bad to worse because of, again, going down to the bottom line, is because of a religious issue. So there is the Muslim population in the Uyghur, in the Xinjiang province. And I think recently, when all this has come to light and it has become international attention, it has received international attention. There were reporters who had gone to that area, who had interviewed people who were in the detention camps. And, every day we are hearing more and more, issues coming out, like, issues controlling births, and issues like other issues like sterilization and forced sterilization, and trying to even verge on genocide. And people have even made a claim that it is a genocide that's happening, with the not just the detention, but also the brutality of what is happening in these detention camps. So going by what I started off with earlier, knowing with Tibet, we know that China has always been very steadfast in its policies and very unrelenting. So I do not see, until and unless there is international intervention, I do not see this ending anytime soon. And earlier, Dr. Dalio did mention that any kind of human rights intervention in China will also borders on the issue of national sovereignty. So those two questions are really important, because to interfere in a human rights violation happening internally would also require, abridging China's sovereignty. And I don't think anybody can do that without going into an wholesale aggression. And that is why we've seen why Tibet is still a problem today. We still know why they have a government in exile in India. They have not been able to go back. The Dalai Lama lives in exile. And so we know that this problem is not going away. So, and the interference is a bigger problem, I think. And so I feel this, the Uyghur situation might escalate to the point where, although China is a signatory of the International, Tribunal on Criminal Court, they will never even, allow the court to say anything. So yes, that's what I have.
Just want to question. I think that on one hand, we obviously see a lot of denial on behalf of the Chinese government that anything is happening at all. And of course, that is part of the mode of operandi. So there will continue to be denial, but it will continue to be repression. As the doctor just said, I think there will continue to be that repression. The question is to understand why. And it's I'll just say it, it's my layman's analysis that China values national unity at almost all costs, and national control at almost all costs, certainly at the cost of individual liberty in so many cases, and in this case in particular. And there is, of course, I call it the jet stream, the subjet stream, that sometimes faith can cause uprising and inspiration and things of that nature. And so because of the huge geographic footprint of China, and historically, I don't know if colonizing is the right word, but I think there is some element of it, but basically conquering all of these different territories and trying to bring them under one flag, if you will, that is part of why the repression will continue. What they, and I think it's unmerited, to be perfectly honest, but they this whole sense of trying to get unity in the fear of their folks having more freedom. I think there has to be at some point some leaders around the world on the global stage who can hopefully change the mind of the Chinese leaders to see more freedom as a benefit to China going forward. They may lose some territory, but they have vast territories that will still be united because of just how long those folks have been under Chinese rule. But that's the way I see it.
Thanks, David. You're muted. David, you're
Yeah,
muted.
thank you very much. Sorry. Yeah, just a couple of things to add, and I so appreciate the comments that have been made. But let me just say this. One of the things that's been remarkable about the now outgoing Trump administration is that, at least at the level of the president himself, the United States has really been incredibly mute on the issue of human rights in China and on the specific issue of what's happening in Xinjiang. And it's interesting to me that this effort that has occurred in Xinjiang to have massive numbers of ethnically Uyghur individuals rounded up and into these camps, which the Chinese refer to as vocational camps, but which are surrounded by barbed wire, etc. That this occurred starting only about 2 months after President Trump came into office. And I think it raises an interesting question, and that is, why would the Chinese have felt that this was an appropriate time to engage in this kind of activity? Why, under this president, did this occur? And I think it points to the chasm between a kind of self-perception or self-referencing on the part of this administration to itself as being tough on China, and the actual reality that this administration is not perceived that way by decision makers in China. Otherwise, this would not have happened on the watch of this president. So that's one point I want to make. The other point I want to make is, I think, very important, particularly in the context of the moment that we're in this country, where there are millions of Americans, our fellow Americans, on the streets protesting for social justice in this nation. And I just want to say that I think I was the first person to make this point nationally or at all in a talk I did some weeks ago. But if the United States wants to address the issue of Xinjiang or issues of human rights in China generally, I think it's to our benefit to be able to do so with some modicum of moral credibility. And when you have a US president, a sitting US president, who during a presidential debate cannot bring himself to condemn white supremacy, then how in the world is that president going to speak with any credibility about Chinese efforts to round up ethnically Uyghur individuals in Xinjiang and how China treats its ethnic minorities? It was a devastating blow to our credibility around these kinds of issues. And to make the point more broadly, how does a US president who characterizes the American media as, quote, enemies of the people, then go to China and talk about the importance of First Amendment rights and media freedom? We have never seen anything in this country under any president of any party that has so damaged our moral credibility, such as it was, imperfect as it was, to go and talk to China or anyone else about human rights. And I think we have to be humbled by that. We certainly have to recognize that. And I posit that that's probably one of the reasons why this administration has been remarkably mute and soft on China with respect to human rights. This is the weakest US administration by a huge margin that we have ever had in this country in the modern era on the topic of human rights in China. And it's just an example of how, when one looks in the mirror and sees toughness, you have to be cognizant of what people are seeing when they're looking at you. And the Chinese don't see toughness. They see someone they can take to the cleaners when it comes to these kinds of issues. And that's something that has troubled me as an American over the last 4 years.
Thank you. Next question is by Mr. Willis Roberts. I do not believe China is in need of American investment anymore. I believe America has to catch up with China. I also believe that relations with China and the West will not get better while President Xi is in power. My question is, how will the US and China balance trade while competing for global influence? And how can the US do more to address the ongoing problem in Xinjiang without hurting their already downward relationship? It's a complicated question.
I'll start it out, and then maybe the other panelists can get far deeper than I can. I believe that the United States and China have a very symbiotic relationship. China needs U.S. Companies to have their manufacturing and other investments in China in order to keep their people employed and happy, if you will, in a world where they are oppressed and lack freedoms. And of course, the United States, on the other hand, desires to have, as the superpower of the world, capital go to where labor is cheapest and have economic goods and profit margins, maintain American economic dominance. And so in that way, the two nations are very much connected and need each other. And so I disagree with the assertion that they don't need America. They absolutely need American investment in order to keep some level of civil unrest from happening, which is, kind of one of the overarching themes here. They worry that, if you go and ask Chinese leaders and some, citizens in the civic discourse, will America crack down on China when it becomes a superpower? The answer, because I'm a bit of a disciple from Stephen, who you just watched in the National Committee. Last time I was in China, I was there with him in Chengdu. It depends on what the actions are. I think that on the optimistic side, let me just say this. I think that if you look in the context of several hundred years of time rather than just your lifetime, our lifetime, you have to remember that at one point, America declared a revolution and a war against Great Britain when King George dishonored our freedoms and what we believed we wanted as an American way of life. You fast forward to the present and you think of this chasm where China is a four-letter word in American political discourse now because of some merited actions and because of some opportunistic American politicians taking advantage of certain fears and nationalism in our case. But you look at now the United States and Great Britain as the strongest of allies. We went from a terrible war, bloody revolutionary war, to the strongest of allies. And I think we have to try and remain as optimistic that even though we may battle for the power of ideas, the battle for freedom, and I really think that's, it's economic fairness, it's fundamental freedom, and making sure that our freedom and the people of the world's freedom isn't overtaken, and that our market values are still, the world market is still, I will say, tilted in America's direction by our alliances and allegiances and the partnerships that we grow across the world. I pray that one day we can have leadership that can get us into a less contentious frame. I think you have to remember that President-elect Biden was chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. At the time I was working mainly on human rights policies around the world. So I wasn't an expert in a lot of his China, his philosophies on China. But he's certainly a sophisticated international player. And I think that Kamala Harris, because she is Asian and African and from California, which has such incredible ties to China and relationships, and a lot of it is about relationships and how do we de-escalate and get understanding and get to a new plane of relationships, that we really do have maybe a shot at progressing American values over time. I mean, it may be a decade from now, but some really good foundation that could be laid, because some may argue that China has a lot of success in the way they're operating, but you look at Hong Kong, and that stirring conflict and how that can be a domino for other things. They've got to figure out a way to coexist in a more peaceful way, or else it's just going to be an international problem that could end up making other military alliances for people across the nation. So anyway, that's my layman's look at it, but just a couple thoughts.
Thank you. We don't have much time left, so I'm going to skip one question. It's more or less similar to what we already discussed. Next one has something to do with India. I think it's extremely interesting. As India changes its economic strategy to promote more foreign manufacturing, how might China respond? And how might India get in the way of China reaching its economic and political goals? In your opinion, of course, this is the entire panel, does China find India as a real threat? Why yes or no?
That's a heavy question.
It is.
It is, because I think it goes back to so many years of conflict, so many years of cooperation. And so I'm just going to skip to the recent developments here, because in last year we saw a new fresh bout of aggressiveness, in Sikkim and in the Galwan province. And I think China has always been making an attempt to make India realize that they are there, that whole the presence, China's presence. And I say that from experience, because my home state in India is on the northeast side, and we share borders with China. And I know that China has been encroaching very gradually into the easternmost part of India. So, but besides that, besides encroachment and besides aggressiveness, I think India's, at one point of time, India was considered a rising economic power, which we have seen has not come to fruition in recent years. We've seen a downward trend, but China and India have been very strong trade partners. There's a lot of trade happening, and in 2018, Modi and President Xi Jinping agreed to maintain peace along the border. There was an attempt of opening what we call the BCIM, or the Bangladesh corridor, Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar border. So that is what we call in India's words as the look east policy. So there was a big move towards looking east towards China, opening border relations with China, trying to escalate trade. But again, as we see that, China's aggressiveness recently, but also China's efforts to double up their economic influence in the zone in South Asia, where we see, investments in Pakistan, investments in Nepal, investments in Sri Lanka, and all these countries that need that investment. Pakistan we see making these fabulous roads and these, mountain roads that we are like, yes, those roads are so beautiful and efficient and done in so much speed. And it shows that Chinese investment is a threat to India's position. And we feel that in many ways, all these investments have also been an effort by China to counter India's rising economic situation. So I feel that, yes, they will spat with each other, but at the same time, they will also cooperate in many ways for the development of South Asia, because again, both India and China's economy counts for almost 17% of the entire global economy. And so I think both of them, if they see sense and if they can cooperate, and I'm speaking, on behalf of the Indian government, if they see sense and they cooperate, it will be beneficial for both of them, and they can make a stand in the South Asian, Southeast Asian economic zone with such a large population. We have to keep in mind the population, the age of the population. So I think there is a hope, but they are sparing constantly. And I think that could deteriorate relations. And especially now with COVID, nobody wants to hear Chinese in India. So the COVID has become a huge deterrent, and China has been kind of seen as the bringing in of the COVID. So the same, anti-China sentiment that Mr. Firestein talked about is also happening in India.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt. We are literally running out of time. I'd like to take up a local question for Commissioner Tommy Calvert. One person says, I'm interested in U.S.-China relations at the local level. Can you speak on the state of Bexar County-China relations? Thank you.
You bet. Well, unfortunately, there was a commissioner who is leaving the court now where there was a bit of a scandal in terms of a lack of return for the dollars the county spent sending this commissioner over to China to try to make partnerships, and it became in the newspaper. And so the county actually shut down its international economic development operations and has largely yielded a lot of that to the city and we call the Economic Development Foundation. But I have done probably among the most significant work personally to do some things even without a lot of support from county staff. Specifically, when you look at the work we did on the $140 million project called the Arts Residence and Thompson Hotel, that's that new silver skyscraper you see downtown in San Antonio. This was the largest EB5 collection investment in the history of Bexar County. And, for folks in Austin or Dallas or Houston or other cities, they probably will laugh at the numbers that I'm about to give. But it was a $50 million EB5 investment. EB5 is a federal program where high net worth foreigners can invest at the time about $500,000 or $1 million in American business. Those limits have been raised and in exchange get a green card. Often they're doing this in order to have their kids go to an American college. They move the family here and they move their businesses here in a lot of cases and make a footprint of job creation. So that one project, we raised about $50 million. A portion of that was from Chinese folks who were wanting to come into the United States, into San Antonio. And I was there in multiple cities across China, raising money with the Houston EB5 who helped us make that happen. And so we created 1,300 jobs. And so when I go and I talk to San Antonians about the fact that I helped bring foreign investment to create 1,300 jobs, and I often joke that's twice as many jobs as Trump saved at Carrier. Anyway, let's let that go. That's from, and not only is it going to be for that one development, but you think about the repatriation of those high net worth folks from abroad, and that they may establish business in the United States and circulate more dollars in the United States. And by the way, grow positive relationships about the values of freedom and democracy and carry that back over wherever they're from, many of whom may be from China. Now, when I was there doing these foreign investment trips, of course, it was at a time that we were, in the papers in China. It was, commonly talked about the threat of war between the United States and China, that the government of China was turning off the spigot in terms of doing these kinds of investments in the United States. And so it was getting tougher for Chinese investors to do things in the United States because of the bellicose relationship at that time. And it went through ebbs and flows over the Trump administration at various times. But there's an opportunity there for us in the global market because I believe Bexar County can be the leading American county, and San Antonio the leading American city in the information technology economy with the lowest cost of doing business and the highest quality of life, making us a very desirable place. We're seeing a lot of exodus from California. We have over 1.6 million Californians who are moving here. I mean, even Madonna's choreographer, who's a friend of mine, is moving here like in a couple of weeks from Los Angeles. I couldn't believe that. But they like our political environment and just the way things are operating in schools and things like that. So in any event, they too will bring a lot of connections, Californians, quite frankly, to Asia and China. And so, with a vice president, Kamala Harris, whose state is going to have extensive relationships, I wouldn't be surprised if the good-natured and internationalist nature of both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris reusher in an unexpected turn in U.S. China relations. At least I hope it will be more positive with their leadership going forward.
Thank you.
I'm quite certain.
So on behalf of China Town Hall, I'd like to thank all the panelists for your wonderful contribution and all the participants for your great questions. So Armin, I'm sorry we are getting late a little bit. Now, get back to you.
I think we could have a program for 2 hours just with this panel.
Yeah,
So
I did not even go through all the questions.
you guys get the award for bearing the evening hours and stepping up to the plate to do this. We have a lot of students watching from UTSA. I know that they were part of this. So if you're still watching, please go into the chat room and add your ABC 123 in the chat room, so you get credit for watching. But what a extraordinary panel! I watched Commissioner Calvert and Mr. Firestein a year ago at SEDF Business Town Hall, and I was very impressed with the panel, and they had some good synergy. And then with today's additions with the professors and the moderator, and with Dr. Yao and Dr. Nath and Dr. Shu, it is really the optimal panel that I think we should recreate and do it again in 2021. So as I'm thinking ahead for 2021 programming, I do want to thank Dr. Montoya for kicking this event program off. I want to thank Amy Schwartz for helping with logistics. Rebecca Pollock, thank you. And my colleague Samantha, who is in the background, making sure we all are doing well and looking good and sounding great. Please check out our website and UTSA's website. UTSA is utsa.edu. Ours is wacofsa.org to learn about becoming a member. And also, if you want to make donations, we want to appreciate UTSA for their partnership for this one of over 80 town halls, China town halls across the country. And also thanks to the Alamo Asian Chamber of Commerce, our friend Ben Parker, for promoting this event as well. I want to wish you all a very good evening and rest well. Enjoy the rest of your week, and I really appreciate you for taking time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Armin.
Good night.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Take care. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good to see you again, David. Good words.